Welcome back. My name is Matt Reiners, and I'm the co-founder of Eversound, a company dedicated to improving quality of life for older adults by giving them the gift of hearing. Today, I'm joined by Gary Jones, General Manager of Customer Experience at VCPI. Gary and I have grown close over the past few years after hitting a multitude of the same conferences and is someone I actually look forward to seeing at those conferences. Gary is a fellow girl dad, also from Central New York, and will make you feel self-conscious if you're ever in the gym with him at one of those conferences. You got to see it to believe it, guys. But thanks for joining me today, Gary.
Great to be here. Thanks, Matt.
Gary, so let's jump into it. You've been helping providers over the past 5 years, in a multitude of technology solutions.
Yeah.
But what do you think this industry does well?
I think the industry is very eager. I think that's one of the things that the industry does well. They're eager to embrace technology. They have a desire to really, bring technology to life within their communities. And I think that, for more or less, I think that they look at consumer products as an opportunity to bring similar type things into their communities, their facilities, and deploy those types of things to whether it's their residents or staff to make lives easier and to support what's happening in the community. I think that that's where the buck stops, kind of though. In a lot of cases, is they have a strong desire, and especially as we see more and more providers coming into the space that have experience outside of the industry. They're starting to bring some of those experiences into the senior living space, where they use great technology, it's implemented well, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that they see a huge opportunity here, and I think that's where they're very eager to take some of those principles and bring them into this space. But I feel like the space definitely has a lot to learn to be able to actually do some of those things, implement them appropriately, make them useful, make them really augment what's happening within, the world of senior living.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Yeah, we're seeing more and more people coming in from outside the industry where technology is so seamless and set up there. And I definitely have seen an eagerness as well, but in terms of that implementation, it's usually where the buck stops. And, you kind of started going into this, but on the other side of things, rather than, instead of what we do really well, what do you think this industry really needs to embrace or improve on here sooner than later?
Yeah, I think I see providers really talking about these things and using some of these buzzwords like integration and interoperability. And that's where other verticals are really successful in incorporating technology. Is their technology works together. It makes sense and it works together. And I think that it's not necessarily a fault of the providers necessarily. I think that there's things that providers can do on their end to really help support that, but it's also a fault in a lot of cases on the vendors too, and not having their solutions, be interoperable, allow them to integrate with other things. So I think that, we talk about providers, but it's really on both ends of the spectrum. Both have to be willing to come to the table and play. And I think that that's where you look at, companies like Google, companies like Apple that just want to open up their systems to an extent. Apple's a little bit more closed, but you look at Google, they want to open up their solutions so people can integrate because it makes them more useful. It makes them, desirable. And I think that that's really important that the thing that we need to have in our industry is we want products that are desirable because they work to make the lives of providers and residents easier. And I think that's where we look at interoperability and integration as opportunities to do that. And I think that's where we're not successful. We're just not. And it's hard because people really want to see these things work. They really do. And it's frustrating because, we want to see them work too. But in a lot of cases, the products work, but what I'm saying is allowing them to be more efficient, because we know that if we can make these businesses more efficient, they don't have to rely as much on labor, which we know is a huge concern right now in our industry. So if we can build efficiencies and processes that are automated by having systems talk to each other, we can take out the need to have people do some of those steps in that work, and we can have them focus on what's important, which is providing care. So I think that that's where it makes sense when you think about it from the business perspective, which is why it's so important to have these systems, talk to one another, because we know, staffing is a huge concern in our space. So how do we mitigate that from the technology side? And it's having systems and solutions communicate with one another. So that's just kind of my, 30,000 foot view.
And I think it's so true. I mean, I've definitely been told by by other providers where like, if you give me another dashboard to review, right, it's just a pain in the neck. And like, yeah, I think you make a good point, because it's not all on the providers, it's on us too as the vendors. And I think back when I was talking to my friend Scott from 5-Star, who's his motto was, you guys need to collaborate to automate. And I think all of us are quick to kind of build in a silo, but we need to have these conversations, because if we're all dedicated to improving quality of life of not just the residents, but the staff, we need to be about it, right? We can't just talk the talk too, and really do that. And so, Gary, I know technology, innovation, right? All of these buzzwords, and being an industry driven by people, relationships, social connections, how do you see technology playing a role in that?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and a really good question. I think that technology, truthfully, should be there to augment all those things. It should never replace social connections, interactions, experiences. It should be there to augment them. So if there's an experience that happens, I think we leverage technology to make that more meaningful. We leverage technology to make that more comprehensive. We leverage technology to make that more efficient. It's not there to replace in a lot of cases, but it's there to really, support all those things that are, I think, important in, the social environment of a community, and what providers are trying to really, put out there for their staff members and for their residents. So I think when I look at technology in that case, the word that comes to mind is augmentation. It really should augment all the things that are important in a community and that are successful. Like, we don't want to replace like face-to-face interactions, but if we can use technology to, make that interaction seem more special, seem more meaningful, capture those moments, and share them with people, I think that's where technology plays a critical role. And it allows us to also savor and save those experiences and those memories.
Yeah, I love it. And I think you bring up a great point in terms about augmentation. And I've always thought of technology like as a sidekick, right? It's not not replacing what's happening today. It's just making it easier and making it better, and able to capture some of those. And really, I think we're aligned on that. And
I think a good example of that too, Matt, is just like going from paper charting to EHRs. You're still doing the work. It just makes it more efficient. It makes it easier. It makes it less time consuming. We don't have paper laying around all over the place, which is, could be a HIPAA violation if someone were to access a patient's record. It makes it more secure, which is augmenting what's happening when people are actually providing care.
Yeah, I love it. And, if you were to look in your crystal ball here, Gary, of, where do you see technology playing the greatest role in the next 5 years for senior living providers?
Yeah, I think going back to what I was saying about integration, interoperability, I think in the next 5 years, technology should integrate better in our industry. And I'm hopeful that, I think that there's things that we can do as vendors, and also, work with the providers to be able to figure out what's important to them. So I think having, councils and things like that are important to the industry that talk about, what technology is important, what things should be communicating to one another. Let's look at processes that are happening inside communities, and let's really do like an assessment and evaluation of some of that stuff to really understand, okay, what are some of the things that really are critical to communicate with one another. And I think that's where over the next 5 years, we should see a lot of success, because there's always products popping up. There's always similar products popping up in all parts of the industry, but it's about what those products can bring to the table that help make the lives of the providers and potentially the residents easier. And I think that, integration and interoperability they're truly buzzwords, but they mean something. They're there because they mean something. So I think that's where I think we can see a huge improvement over the next 5 years.
I love it. Yeah, I think it's a whole industry needing to step up and really driving that too.
Yeah, for sure.
And I know you've talked about like the eagerness and the interoperability and some of this other stuff, but where are you finding providers swinging and missing when it comes to technology today?
Yeah, I think that they don't really have a Sherpa. They don't really have a guide. Whether that's internal or external, they don't have anyone really helping in a lot of cases. Not every single provider, but I think it's pretty accurate to say in most cases. They don't really have anyone, stepping up to the plate, or looking for someone internally to step up to the plate to really guide their technology strategy. I think that they see things that are shiny and fun, and then they say, okay, I want to latch onto this. I want to grab it because this seems interesting, but they're not really looking at the big picture. And I mean, we see it all the time. We see clients and folks in the industry that have, a multitude of systems that do all the same things, but because, they're working in silos in some cases within provider organizations, they're duplicating their efforts and duplicating their spend. And I think that's an important thing to really take into consideration, is like, who's going to help guide technology strategy within these organizations, because that is really where they're going to be able to see success. By just looking at things that seem interesting and picking them and saying, we're going to implement this, it doesn't really help the overall business. It doesn't really help, what they're trying to do at the end of the day. And that's provide excellent care.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And I think two things where I've seen kind of, piggybacking off what you said, Gary, they'll pick one person to kind of lead that innovation or that technology. And I've seen it in some situations, and granted, it's not for everybody, but they'll just put that innovation title in someone's title that really has no rhyme or reason for it. But one of their core values is innovation. So they need to have a point person. And I think too, it speaks to their like technology roadmap, where I've definitely have seen people like that, where I talk to them. So like trying to understand what their technology vision is. And they're just kind of plucking things. They're kind of letting us drive that for them, where it should be like the other way around, where if they're trying to, improve resident engagement or stuff, like, of course they could talk to us about that, but it's not like us determining their tech roadmap for them. I think it just comes from like a level of comfortability and like familiarity with it. So I see that. And, so Gary, one of my favorite questions is, if you could give other senior living providers or technology vendors, 3 guiding principles as they are working here through 2022 into 2023, which is just feels weird to say, what would you say?
I think, I like to keep it simple. Budget, plan, and execute. I think that, if you do those 3 things, I think that that's where you're going to see success, because obviously you got to make sure that you have funds to do what you want to do. Plan. So making sure that you have that person that's going to help guide those efforts, and then work with the vendor partners to really execute on that plan and those strategies. And I think that that's where, you'll be able to see a lot of success in implementing technology, for providers across the industry.
I love it. Well, Gary, I just want to thank you for joining me today. I'll tag you in the post so people can get in contact with you. Okay. And I hope everyone will see you in a gym here sometime soon.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, Matt.